everyone. Welcome to day 4 of the Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute's 2022 Youth Climate Summit. We're so glad you could join us for our last day of virtual learning. I'm sure you're all excited to meet here in person tomorrow. Our youth climate activists for today are Sarah Saeed from Toronto, Canada, and Shu Tezkat from Colorado, USA. We also have subject matter expert, Mr. Andrew McFarlane from YCS, who's based locally here in Bermuda. Today's focus is all about climate and you, how you can actually plan your future using what is within your control. We each manage our own opinions, attitudes, aspirations, dreams, desires, and goals. We control how we spend our time, what we consume, and who we choose to spend time with. Since we're on the topic of self-control, yesterday you had the chance to choose your track. The options were conservation, sustainability, and justice. The track that you choose to focus on will determine your on-site arrival and registration time on Saturday. If anyone has not gotten a chance to choose their track, I'll provide the link again. Please check the chat. You have until the end of today's session to choose your track. Just a reminder that this is your Youth Climate Summit. It's about your future within your environment. So it's up to you to decide your path. So choose your track wisely, because tomorrow we will want to hear questions and ideas about the specialization that you chose. Also, another reminder to please rename yourselves. Click on your pick, select the rename option, put in your first initial, last name, and school. Again, all your responses to the polls and Mentimeters are completely anonymous. Please post your questions and ideas in the chat and participate in all the polls. We want to know what you have taken away from this experience. You guys were pretty quiet yesterday, so I'm hoping that's going to change, especially after Jessica presented an awesome presentation where she essentially explained how to ask hard questions, right? And that's what we're looking for, is those awesome hard questions. And just be prepared to ask a ton of questions today and tomorrow. So again, please post your questions in the chat. I'm just going to give a quick shout out to BUEI. Of course, without them, this event would not be possible. And of course, our partners, HSBC and YCS, they've done so much for this event, and we greatly appreciate the opportunity. So we're going to get started with a poll today. And that poll contains the exact same questions that we asked you on Monday at the start of the summit. It's a 4-question poll that should pop up on your screen. Go ahead and submit your responses. It'll be interesting to see if the group's level of confidence and concerns about the climate topics that we have discussed has changed within the past 3 days. All right, so our first poll question, how concerned are you about climate issues? And it looks like you guys are pretty concerned, right? It's a pretty even spread between concerned and very concerned. Second poll question, how confident do you feel that you can discuss climate change with one of your peers? And that's actually still pretty low. Only 9% of you feel confident that you can discuss the topics that we've talked about over the past 3 days. All right, I see we still have some responses coming in. So get your responses in, guys. Let's see. Question 3, how confident do you feel that you can discuss climate change with an adult? And it's kind of an even spread between somewhat confident and not quite confident. I'm hoping by the end of today, you guys will be very confident to discuss climate change with the adults around you. And question 4, I believe actions taken in Bermuda can influence climate change here on our island. Let's see what the results are. Yes, all right, 94% of you, that's perfect. So 44 out of 47 people believe that the actions taken in Bermuda can influence climate change here, and that's awesome. All right, I've got to stop using awesome today, don't I? I got to think of better words. Fantastic, great, wonderful, A+. All right. So we are going to move on and welcome our first speaker. So I'd like to welcome Sarah Saeed, innovator, poet, and climate change activist from Toronto, Canada. Sarah is the founder of You Are the Change, an international youth-led organization that focuses on youth mobilizing action and mindsets to become sustainability leaders within their communities. The link to her bio is in the chat. Her work has been recognized by Parliament members, and she's been named one of the top 20 under 20 youth in the world. Also, one of the top 25 under 25 environmentalists in Canada. Just to name a few of her achievements there. She's got quite a few if you check out her bio. Sarah is also a published poet of 2 national books, and her climate activism related poetry has won an international honorable mention at the Genius Olympiad. Partly, I'm particularly interested in Sarah's work and can totally relate to her content, as Sarah and I share an enthusiasm for girls, inspiring other girls to pursue science, technology, engineering, art, mathematics as well. And her current projects that focus on cellular agriculture and carbon capture. Sarah will have 5 minutes to present to us, and I'll give her a 1-minute warning before her question and answer period starts. So don't forget to post your questions in the chat. Thank you. Welcome, Sarah. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Noelle, for the introduction. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen so we can begin. All right, so hi everyone. As Noelle introduced me as, my name is Sarah, and I'm a climate tech innovator from Toronto. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk a little bit about my journey, but also talk about how each and every single one of you here today can also have an impact. And so when I was looking at the word impact a few days ago, I realized that ACT is actually a part of it. And so that's how I wanted to start off today's presentation by mentioning how if you want to have an impact, you must act. Kind of like the word itself. I want to start off with a quick icebreaker that will pave the rest of today's presentation. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's really to hear your perspective. So if you could please type in the chat, what does innovation mean to you? Or when you hear the term innovation, what is the first thing that comes to mind? So for example, to some people, this could be technology, but I want to hear from each of you, what does innovation make you think of? Awesome, I see making a change, that's great. Creativity and new ideas, growth, something new, creativity. Awesome, you guys are on the right track. And so essentially, what you guys mentioned is exactly the definition of innovation. Innovation is about taking the initiative. And I see we're getting a lot more ideas in the chat as well. Using anything at your disposal, creativity, new ideas, transformation, altering. Yeah, those are all basically what innovation means, because innovation is using tools at our disposal, as it was mentioned, to create this impact. And this can be in the form of technology or any medium that you prefer, whether that be an organization. It could also be, let's say, a social media campaign or a community group or community involvement. It's about taking those first steps to try to change a current system or to bring change to your community on a national scale or even internationally. But in order to tackle some of the biggest problems, we need to have a specific focus. And so while today I'll be talking about climate change and how we can mitigate it, it's also about realizing that climate change is like this huge puzzle piece. And we see this overall image every single day, from wildfires to glaciers melting to biodiversity loss. But what we need to realize is that we need to hone our focus on a specific problem. And that can start when we dissect climate change apart from this big puzzle piece. And we start to look at the problems that are contributing to this global term known as climate change. And what we're left with is actually smaller problems that we can tackle. So for example, plastic pollution. Or for example, we're left with the lack of climate education around the world. Or for example, fossil fuel funding, which we need to hold polluters accountable for. And so it's about realizing that these sub pieces, sub problems really contribute to this global problem. What we need to realize as well is that if we don't take action, then who will? If it's not us, then who else is going to step up and bring the change that we want to see in the world? And so it's about realizing that shift from apathy to empathy. But instead of just resonating with the problem, we need to also turn that fear and that worry that we get from when we hear climate change and turn that into climate action instead. And the way that we can do that is in 3 simple steps, which I'll be talking about, and also giving examples of how I use these 3 steps in my own life as a climate tech innovator. So these 3 steps are: the first, curiosity; the second is growth mindset; and lastly is moonshot thinking. So when it comes to curiosity, it's about choosing a problem that you deeply resonate with. And every one of us have a problem that we wish we could change or that we want to see a change in the world. And essentially that's what you want to focus on, is that particular problem. Because by choosing a problem that you're passionate about, you'll be invested long-term in also understanding the problem, designing and understanding the solution, and eventually scaling that solution even further. So some questions that you can ask yourself in case if you don't know what problem you would like to focus on yet is: what motivates me? Or what excites me? What is something that I believe needs to be solved? And what is important to me? The basics of curiosity
Hey,
is...
Sarah.
Hi,
Sorry to
Noel.
interrupt. Just letting you know, this is your 1-minute warning until we start Q&A.
Okay, awesome. Secondly, we have your mindset. And this will basically allow you to turn any goal into a project. And the way to do that is to reframe the way that you think of success and failure. So success is how willing you are to not get the result you're looking for and then continue trying. Whereas failure is standing idle in the face of a problem you can contribute a solution to. Lastly, we have moonshot thinking. And this is a very basic principle. That is, your age is not a limitation, it is your superpower. And so using your perspectives as a youth really is the difference between a solution that you can design. And so I basically use this 3-step process in the past 2 years when I discovered oil pollution happening near my home country, which is Morocco. And so I would like to cue the poll, which is our last poll for today with my presentation. And I would like to ask you all, how many marine animals do you think die each year because of oil spills? Because of time, I'll take the current answers that we have right now. And so I'll share the results. So a lot of you said that it's about 1 million animals to 100 million. And so the actual correct answer is 100 million marine animals. And that was a lot. So at that point, I realized that I wanted to start designing a solution. And that's when I began to amplify mindsets like how I define success and failure. And eventually, over the past 2 years, I was able to design a biosorbent, which is kind of like this biodegradable sponge that can remove 98% of oil. I founded You Are the Change, as Noelle had mentioned. And additionally, I began to start speaking to young people like yourselves on this 3-step process, and also C-suite executives on how they can incorporate youth ideas and as well different, environmental procedures in their own organization. I want to highlight that change starts and ends with you. Change really can begin when you use your passion as this tool brush to create change. And really, it's up to you how you want to use it. So you could use, let's say, entrepreneurship, technology, creative arts, even social media, engineering. The limits are up to you, because those who are working in the space of innovation can innovate. And so I would like to leave you all with one last question that I hope will inspire you to take action today. And that is, what will your story be? Thank you so much.
Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. I hope all the young ladies in the audience have taken away some valuable lessons from your inspiring story. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, up next is our local subject matter expert, Andrew McFarlane from AXA XL. He's the head of the climate department, making him responsible for the company's global climate strategy. Check the chat. His bio link will be there. For those of you that aren't familiar with the company AXA XL, I'll give a brief description. Essentially, they are an insurance company that's expertise in a wide spectrum of industries. They offer creative ideas and enthusiastic support for the protection of assets. Really quickly, just for those of you that aren't familiar with it, each one of you is considered an asset, right? You're something that's worth putting for the future to make sure that you reach your full potential, which is why your parents buy health insurance for you from companies like AXA XL. So for example, when you go to the dentist, the insurance company helps to pay for the service that you, helps to pay for the health service to keep your teeth clean. And essentially they do that so that your parents don't have to pay the high costs of that health service. If you're not able to eat or talk properly because you don't have teeth, that would negatively affect your health and your lifestyle, which could technically keep you, the asset, from reaching your full potential in life. So in essence, insurance companies provide benefits so that people can protect their assets for the future without losing money. And if we broaden that concept to a more global view, AXA XL provides insurance for other important assets too, like the plants and animals that we eat for food, the technology that we use to grow that food, and the boats and planes that transport it here to our island for our consumption. So with that being said, let's welcome Andrew McFarlane from AXA XL.
Thank you. No, just checking you can hear me okay. Everybody good? Great. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm really delighted to be a part of the second Youth Climate Summit and join you this afternoon to give you my perspective on your role in the future in a changing climate. Before we move into the content, I did just want to get your reaction and launch a poll around getting your perspectives as to why you are here this week. So if we can take a few seconds to answer the poll, get a bit of a feedback as to the reasons and what resonates for you as to why you're here.
Apologies, Andrew. Would you mind sharing your slides again?
Oh, sorry, did they just drop off? Yeah, sure. You see them now?
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so thanks for that. There's no right answer to this question, right? So my expectation was that when I saw these results that I'd get a good spread, and we've got a pretty good spread, but the environment one and wanting to make a difference is obviously the front runner. And I think what's important as you go through today, as you go through the rest of this week, is that there are people that are attending this session or attending these this conference and this event with different perspectives, right? They're coming at the problem with different reasons, and as you move into the weekend, when you're looking at initiatives and ideas, having that sense that people are here for different reasons, I think will be really meaningful for you. So before we jump into the content, I wanted to give you a little bit of I thought it only fair to give you a little bit of about me and how I've got here. We have a family of 5. I'm married to Joanne, my wife, who works at Liberty Group, which owns Belco. I have 3 sons, Callum, Jamie, and Lewis, aged 15, 13, and 9, who are all at Warwick Academy. I'm aware there's some Warwick kids, so you've probably come across them over the past few years. How did I end up in Bermuda? I was born and raised in South Africa. I went to high school and university there, and I graduated from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg with an actuarial science and statistics degree. After I graduated, I wanted to travel the world a bit, see what it was like outside of South Africa. And I moved to London to go and work in insurance and reinsurance, and I ended up at the Catlin Syndicate at Lloyd's. I qualified as an actuary in 2006, and soon after that, when Callum was just 3 months old, we had the opportunity to move to Bermuda, and I've been here ever since. Having asked you why you're here this week, I thought it was only fair to give you a bit of a perspective as to what motivates me. And probably it was a little unfair to only ask you to pick one of those topics, because as I reflected and sort of thinking about my messages for today, I actually realized that all of those things motivate and impact me. I'm worried because I have 3 young kids, and I'm worried about the environment and the planet that they're going to inherit. I care for the environment, and I have for a long time, and I do want to make a difference, and I'm trying to do that in my job. Importantly, I think, although I want to learn, I feel like I'm learning every day on this job. I'm learning more about the science. I'm learning more about understanding the impacts that we're having and we're making. But I'm also learning about the psychology and the behavior side around a changing climate. And I think that's a really critical and important piece as we look to effect change. And then, as I mentioned, or as Noel pointed out in my intro, I'm currently the head of climate for AXA XL, part of the AXA Group. And my role is really to make sure that the role that we have as an insurer in the global economy, we're very conscious about the climate impact, and then the extent to which we're able to help our clients and ourselves as we transition to a net zero world. So it's a little bit about me. I also thought it was worthwhile to give a little bit of perspective about how my climate journey started. How did I end up in the role that I'm in? And I think being born and growing up in South Africa was the sort of the foundations of that. We spent a lot of time out in the bush. We spent a lot of time down at the coast. I spent a lot of time out in nature, just appreciating the environment. But I think what really crystallized this for me was an opportunity that I had when I was around 15 years old, where around 40 kids were selected to go on a week-long trip touring around South Africa in that area that I sort of highlighted, learning and being exposed to different parts and different communities. So the main themes of that trip were around conservation. The impacts of a changing climate were not front of mind at that point in time, but we can see conservation, learning about composting, the impact that we have on the environment, learning about recycling, the need to be less wasteful. And then, as I mentioned, the timing of that trip was soon after South Africa was coming out of apartheid, and I had that group of kids had a real opportunity to live and learn about the diverse backgrounds that people have, that the students had on that trip, which we weren't necessarily exposed to before that. So those were the themes. What did I learn? I learned to really have an open mind. I distinctly remember at the time thinking about the conservation aspect. South Africa was going through a period where we had a large excess amount of elephants. And the way that we were dealing with them as a country was to cull them. And as somebody interested in conservation, as somebody passionate about the environment, I couldn't really square away how we could be taking such a drastic action for such a magnificent creature. And it was through exposures on that trip, through opening my mind, through learning, through having sessions and understanding more about the implications and the devastation that overpopulation from elephants have on the local ecosystem, led me to appreciate that, you know, there are multiple solutions to a problem, and you have to have an open mind. You can't just be narrowed and beholden on the one that you've chosen. Valuing perspectives. As I mentioned, you know, it was a trip of 40 kids from different environments. They link it to the diversity piece. Everybody brought a unique perspective, and everybody had a unique background. And I think that was really important learning from that trip. And then other people care. As I mentioned on that, as you saw on that poll, people are here for different reasons. Lots of people care, they just care in other ways. All right, so a bit about me, where my climate journey started. Where are we now? You know, a lot of you are here because you're aware of the impact that we're having, and afraid to have to start or have to, you know, reinforce some of the bad news. The picture on the left there shows global emissions between 1990 and 2019. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that those emissions are continuing to grow. So we're at a position where we know that we need to change. We know that we need to control the emissions, but we haven't quite got there yet. We haven't quite done enough. And just recently, as the COP in Egypt finished, COP 27 finished in just last week, sorry. I think the messaging coming out of that the goal and the commitment we're trying to achieve of 1.5 degrees Celsius increases relative to pre-industrial levels is fading quickly behind us. So we've got more to do, and we've got to do it a lot more quickly. The picture on the right, I think we can't think just about the emissions. We have to think about the impact that we're having on the environment as well. You know, where we are, the demand for goods and services that we have, the ease with which we're able to purchase goods and services. I don't think we quite appreciate the impact that that's having, not only on the climate, but the environment as well, which is a little bit paradoxical when we sort of know that we're so heavily reliant on the environment in order to produce those goods and services. So that's sort of the climate and the environment side of things. What if we sort of look at the social side, right? So the picture on the left there again is the same chart you would have seen on the previous slide. All it does is it breaks down those emission levels between the countries just in that period from 1990 to 2018, those countries which have contributed the most. And I think what is stark there is to see that the developed countries, what we call the developed countries, Western Europe, the US, they are the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions over that period of time. And if that had to go back even further, we would see that there is a bigger proportion of that. And that's difficult because we're in a position now where we need to reduce emissions at a global level. Countries that are well developed, they have the resources to do that. But we're asking countries which are least well developed, which don't necessarily have the money available to them to decarbonize, to come on the journey that we need to have. And that has the potential to put those countries to squash their development and sort of put them back to where they were on their economic journey for a number of years. So we have to be very conscious and very thoughtful about what we call about the just transition, make sure it's fair and equitable for everybody. And then the piece on the right is just to appreciate that as we try and solve this problem that is a changing climate and the implications, that it is complicated, right? We've got to think about the actions that governments take, the actions that industry takes, and population, and they're all motivated and driven by different key areas. Governments, they're constrained by the sort of the political system that they operate in. industry, that quest for an extra dollar of profit. To what extent do we balance that profitable growth with being responsible and having a purpose as a company? And then the actions that we take as a population, right? So before we jump into sort of what I think your role and what the position that you have, I just wanted to get your answer to this question. So what proportion of the global population do you think are younger than 20 years old? We could just quickly launch that poll and have it up for a few seconds. Poll coming up. Okay, a good mix there. I think we've got quite a few answers there, sort of varying between 27 and 33%. And the correct answer is 33%, right? So when we think about the role that you have to play and why you should be positive, right? 1 out of 3 of the global population is represented by you, the group who are in this youth, who are attending this Youth Climate Summit. So you have a voice. You have a very strong voice, and there is a large portion of you in the global population to have that impact and have that difference. And where can you do that? You can do it through the schools, when you go back to school. As I mentioned, after that trip that I went on, I took an idea and an opportunity back to the school that I was part of. It didn't progress. It was about saving water and reducing electricity consumption. But at the time, the environment that we were operating in or we were living in wasn't necessarily as progressed as where it was. There wasn't the attention around that it needed to be. The ideas that you have from this week, the thoughts that you have, take them back to your schools, your clubs, your local community. It's about influencing your family and your friends. What messages are you going to bring back to your friends after this week? How are you going to get them to come along for the journey and the journey and the need that we're on in order to have that difference and make that impact? And then I think
just a warning, this is your 1-minute warning before Q&A.
Sure. And then just on the decisions that you make, whether it's the food you choose to purchase or the clothes you choose to work, I think an important one is around the vote. Who you choose to have in charge, who you choose to help make those decisions and govern the country. And I think the other piece is around the opportunities that you have. So you've heard from a real diverse set of activists, passionate people about the environment in your sort of age. What are you going to do? How are you going to extend that activism and take it back to your community? Education, you can continue to develop and continue to learn. I'm mentoring a lady who's at a university studying sustainability. She's got the opportunity to continue to develop and understand and be aware of the impacts and how it relates to society. And then career opportunities. I think if you had said in 5 years' time or 5 years ago that I would have the opportunity to marry my professional qualification as an actuary and my passion around the environment and have this job, I would have said you're mad. So there will be future career opportunities for you as the space develops. And so just to leave you with this quickly, I did put that chart up. I think it was a little unfair just to be negative about that. I think if you look at the period between 2010 and 2019, what some of you might have noticed that is that the pace and the rate of increase is slowing. Right, so we are making a difference. It's just not quick enough. And then another piece is just around the capacity that we as humans have for change. And so the lady on the left there is Professor Sarah Gilbert, who was instrumental in developing and scaling the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine for COVID. When humans come under pressure and we need to change, we have that ability to collaborate and affect change. Elon Musk, for all his issues that he has around Twitter at the moment, we shouldn't forget that he has made significant strides as we need to transition through battery storage and electrical vehicles. if you take three things away from this session, right, out of all the content that was shared, I would say have an open mind, a growth mindset. And remember, you have a voice, and 1 out of 3 of the global population is from this group. And when it comes to change, we can change, right? But we need to lead it and we need to be a part of it. So thank you very much.
Andrew, thank you so much for that positive presentation. We do have some questions for you, and we will start off with a question from the chat. How has AXA XL intentionally changed some of its internal practices to support climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have an opportunity through a number of areas to sort of impact and make change. Through our own operations, as a company, we travel, we obviously have offices, and so we've taken concerted and made concerted efforts to be more mindful and set targets around ensuring that the emissions that we produce from our assets, from our travel, that we've got commitments to reduce those over time. We also make investments and we also take risk, and we're doing a lot of work there to understand that those companies that we support, that they're also on the right trajectory, right? That it's not only what we're doing, but it's what our clients are also doing, and ensuring that we try and hold them account in order to get the whole of society towards net zero and be more mindful of their overall emissions.
That is invaluable. Thank you so much. Due to some technical difficulties, Sarah wasn't able to do her Q&A. So I hope you guys don't mind. We're going to share the Q&A. So I'm going to go back and forth with questions until our time is up. So Sarah, what was a pivotal moment in your climate activism journey? What was that like?
So I still distinctly remember it just because I'm someone who reacts a lot to statistics, and statistics really push me to take action. So it was actually through a school project in grade 4, about when I was 9 years old. And our teacher gave us to do this project on world issues, and I was tasked with the world issue climate change. And I began to start doing research onto what climate change is and how it's impacting communities on a global scale, and really came across all these very detrimental, dystopian-like reality images of the floodings, let's say, that we recently saw in the news in Pakistan, to the droughts. And it really led me to realize that climate change is something real, it's existent, it's present, and it needs immediate action in order to be mitigated. And so literally the next day, right after I had done that presentation project in my school, our teacher shared with us this quote that said, "Be the change that you wish to see in the world." And so that really resonated with me. And since then, I've always wanted to kind of create this sort of impact and really start taking action. So that started really small, from, making my own better climate informed decisions, like using a reusable water bottle instead of a plastic water bottle, talking to my classmates about climate change, helping my teachers organize the Earth Day assembly. And then slowly, as I found a passion for STEM, I decided to take the innovation route. And actually, my first project was off a science website. So I was able to work on this project. It gave me kind of this inspiration to do more. And then it's about these small little actions that led to these big changes.
That's great. That is super inspiring, Sarah. Thank you so much. So I'm going to switch back to Andrew now. What do you feel is an easy way for a company to become climate friendly?
The first part is around raising the awareness amongst your colleagues within the company, right? So we've been very fortunate this year to have the support to actually have a climate training that we're running across the whole of AXA XL. So it's 9,000 colleagues who are going through a training. Raising that awareness creates that ability to sort of think about what their actions are and start to make connections around what they're doing and how they can have change. And then I think it's similar to what Sarah said. It's also around taking those small initiatives that pop up in different parts of a company like ours, which is a global company, and embracing them and supporting them, and seeing where they can be extended and mobilized to other parts of the organization. And that's part of my role as well, right? To be aware of all those initiatives that are going on and make sure that we can bring them across the whole of AXA XL.
Thank you, Andrew. Sarah, before I move on to your next direct question, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about what Andrew just said.
Yeah, so I think it's amazing that you're holding this kind of training initiative. In Canada as well, we have this grocery store known as Sobeys. And I actually was able to be one of their keynote speakers for this program that they're doing to transition and limit plastic waste. And so to transition like fully into like the sustainability and reach net zero as well. So I relate to what you're doing. And at the same time, I think it's very important, those really small steps. And it's great to see a company like yours taking major climate action.
All right, I'm going to ask you both this question as your final question. We've got about 4 minutes left. So Sarah, what has been the greatest hindrance on your personal journey to help defeat climate change? This is a direct question from the chat, and I'll be asking you both the same thing.
So I think I have to break this down into two parts, just because I think sometimes I do limit myself. And I think that sometimes even my own worries and fears do limit my own journey. And also at the same time, there are other exterior factors. So for example, when I began my climate tech journey, I really had no understanding of the technology that I was starting with. And so the biosorbent that I was talking about works on nanotechnology, which is like looking at things on a really small scale. And at this time, I was only in grade 10. I had only heard the term nanotechnology. I didn't really understand the chemistry behind it. And so it was really about me doing a lot of research and trying to self-educate how myself and how, nanotechnology could play a role into my innovation in the sort. And that was a bit of a challenge because I was often not understanding the terms, and it was a bit challenging. But I think, as mentioned in my presentation, looking at defining success and failure. And so really every single time I got stuck, I still persevered, and that was my own sense of success. And so really just that whole mindset shift can really impact how long you decide to take this project. And then in terms of external factors, I think one of the biggest things is other adults not really sometimes not supporting youth or responding. And so when I was working on this project, I did reach out to a few people on LinkedIn, like cold emailing, to get a bit of advice. And sometimes there would be no response. Sometimes I think that's just one of the biggest things. So I would say it's a bit of different factors, but I think it's about just continuing to persevere. And eventually, as I sent more cold emails, there were people who took a chance on you. And so I was able to have a meeting with them, get advice on my project, and then eventually continue to where I am today.
That's fantastic, Sarah. Thank you so much. Andrew, you've got 1 minute and the exact same question. What has been the greatest hindrance on your personal journey to help defeat climate change?
So, yeah, great question. The blockers that I've come in have been really within some of the people internally at our company, right? My team and I know that we've got this problem on our hands that we're all trying to work to solve. But sometimes you run into people who it's not their top priority. And that can be quite draining from an energy perspective. It can be quite draining from a sort of a motivation and a drive perspective. But I think what's really, as we've gone through this, what we've learned is that the majority of people do care, right? It's just finding what they care about and how you can crack open that conversation, which was a little bit around that first poll that I put up, right? You have to try and understand through what lens they're coming at the problem. And once you've figured that out and started to work through that, you begin to get a little bit more traction. So, you know, running into people who you don't think care about it is energy sapping. But I think there are ways to navigate that. And I think, you know, learning that has certainly helped me on this journey.
Thank you both so much for your insight and your innovation and the education that you've provided to us today. We're going to move on to our next Mentimeter question of the day, but thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nana.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys, I'm now going to ask you a series of 3 questions. The link is going to be in the chat as always. Once you've entered all the words that you want to for the first question, you can feel free to start answering the next questions. No pressure, take your time. All right, so question 1, in a word or two, what are some skills, talents, or areas of interest that you enjoy? We're going to make a word cloud out of this. So let's think about talents, interests, abilities, and skills. For example, do you like to sing, but do you sing well? Do you like to play guitar? Do you like to be a leader and in control? Do you appreciate art and illustration, math, sailing, swimming? Personally, I like dog training. Others may feel differently. And let's see what our responses look like. All right. All right, so dance is a big one. Reading, perfect. Art is in like 3rd position. Writing is about the same, a little bit smaller. Swimming, the ocean, I love that answer. Definitely ocean advocacy here. Let's see. And writing is getting bigger and bigger. So basically, the bigger the word is, that means that the more of you appreciate that interest. All right, so word cloud 2. The question is, what climate-related topic is most important to you? Describe it in a few words. Sustainability is the biggest one thus far. We've got 2 sustainabilities, actually. Reading, conservation, sea level rise. That's a good one. And that does have detrimental effects for our island. All right, question 3 is an open-ended response. So in the 3rd question, let's try and connect the dots. We'll brainstorm ideas about how your hobbies and talents could be used for making a difference in the climate space that interests you most. We're also going to play some music to give you a little bit of time to write. Just a reminder that if you click the next button at the bottom of your Menti, it'll take you to the next slide where you can submit your answers. I see swimming mentioned multiple times. We definitely have some ocean lovers in this group. Great job, everyone. Great job on the Mentimeters. Our last speaker of the day is an environmental activist and hip hop artist who has been on the front lines of the climate and environmental movement since the young age of 6. He has spoken multiple times at the UN, addressing the General Assembly and spoken on panels with the likes of Pharrell Williams and Bernie Sanders. I'm going to play you a short video of his performance at Earth Sessions in Los Angeles, an event that serves as an entry point to the world of environmental justice.
Life, a series of moments, may I borrow one of yours? I promise to use it wisely. And I'm honest more than I'm timely. Searching is where you'll find me. I'm searching for more than answers. I'm searching for more solutions. Searching the sky for stars disguised by all the pollution. Searching my mind for truth, buried in my excuses. I'm sick of the lack of balance. I'm sick of not dreaming lucid. Sick of feeling so sick inside. The whole world is sick unless you live in a lie. So far from the future, but I feel I've arrived. And I'm up through the night. Your perception of me is set, but I'm different inside. I fly underwater.
So the individual that you just saw up on screen has been featured on National Geographic, Nickelodeon, Rolling Stone, Netflix, and so many others. But his unique talent for connecting people through popular culture and sharing the message of his indigenous roots to better serve the planet and reimagine the future for his own generation has not been lost. You heard his new single, San, at the start of today's program. He was willing to give us 15 minutes of his time today to speak with you. So listen up. Please welcome Shutesk, also known as X.
Pialino chime, nimeshlah paloa, nanotoka shuteskat donatiu, no masewalpowayan ewa, Santa Cruz Calpishka, Xochimilco Altepet. Buenos dias, morning everybody. My name is Shuteskat, and I just introduce myself as I would in my indigenous language, my people's language, Nahuatl, which is an indigenous language from Mexico, from Xochimilco. And that's where my ancestors are from on my father's side. And I'm grateful to be here, grateful to be helping close out the day, close out this series of events. And yeah, I want to invite everybody to, if y'all are feeling like it, or if you have access to it, feel free to turn your cameras on. I know we're still figuring out how to feel comfortable and good doing all this kind of stuff on Zoom, but you're more than welcome to, if that's a vibe. And if not, I feel you, it's all good. But I think for me, I've been in this climate space for a really long time, and I was looking at kind of some of the framework of the conversations y'all been having around the climate crisis, around climate education, and really thinking critically about what draws us to these issues. Why do we care? Why should we care? And I think when I look back, I was, as was said in my introduction, like I was like 6 years old when I first got involved in this stuff, and I hopped up on stage and started talking about the climate crisis. And I look back at that and I'm like, okay, well, what was the impetus? Why did I start talking about this? Why did I care? And I think about the way in which people were talking about climate in 2006. I was born in 2000. I guess I'm probably a bit older than a lot of y'all, but back then the dialogue wasn't exciting. It wasn't inspiring. It wasn't pulling anybody in from my generation. So it definitely wasn't like the public narrative or the media narrative around climate change. Like that didn't hit for a lot of reasons. But for me, my personal connection to all of this really comes from a couple places, and it's really from the way I was raised, I'd say. And I'm curious to hear, and learn more honestly about y'all's personal connection to this too, because I know, being from an island nation like Bermuda, I can imagine that the personal stakes are quite high. But my father, as an indigenous immigrant, really did everything in his power to raise me with a lot of the traditional teachings and values that helped shape my worldview. And I grew up very much on the land, in nature, doing everything possible to reclaim and relearn our ceremonial ways of life. And on my mother's side, she was an activist and an organizer. And those two worlds kind of brought me into this understanding that we have an immense amount of responsibility to carry on the legacy of our ancestors, of those that came before us. You know, my pops, for us, I think there's a great deal that was lost and taken and stolen from our communities and from our people as a result of colonization. And so every deliberation, kind of every decision we were making, and the way we moved through the world was very much with this intention to preserve kind of our cultural survival, my name, my language, the way the inspiration and the knowledge that I try to transmit through my music. Like all of that was with this intention that, you know, to preserve and to continue our culture, we have to not only hold on to this wisdom, but also understand that our relationship to the planet around us, to the land, to the water, to these natural resources are tied to our cultural survival. And I think that's true for everybody, actually, not just Indigenous people. And unfortunately, the stories that I saw being told around the climate crisis were not engaging. We're not inspiring to young people. There was a lot of like old white scientists and advocate and people in the space of conservation and big now environmental nonprofits. And don't get me wrong, like there's a lot of great old white folks that have done amazing things, you know, in the climate space. But I didn't see myself, and I didn't connect to it in so many ways. So when I started to speak out, you know, I had to really understand that my place within all of this was to open the door for a lot of other young people to tap into this work. And for me, it was very personal as well. Like the wildfires that affected my home in Colorado. You know, I grew up in this mountain town in Colorado, right at the foothills of the mountain. And every year we would get worse and worse wildfires. And all these places that I would go to do ceremony or to spend time in nature with my family, I saw it slowly being destroyed by the wildfires, by the warming temperatures. And so I think very viscerally, like the world around me, I started seeing it kind of fall apart, you know, because it was the climate documentaries and stories on the news. And there's a very removed picture of the climate crisis that talks about polar bears and ice caps melting and things that like I didn't really relate to. I didn't necessarily see in my everyday life, but the wildfires was one of the climate impacts, was one of the results of the climate crisis that began to remind me that this is a lot more than just an energy issue or an environmental issue or a policy issue. This was human lives. Like friends of mine lost their homes in these fires. And then it got really real when I started to see the impact of fossil fuel extraction, of the natural gas extractive industry kind of taking over my community. And as I learned that this movement, the movements around the climate really started to develop from being these, you know, very kind of sterile white conservationist spaces talking about energy policy and the greenhouse gas effect. And we were still trying to get people on the same page about the reality of the climate crisis. When I began to saw Indigenous organizers like those that led the Keystone XL pipeline movement and those that led Standing Rock, like that's flipped a switch in me, because all of a sudden I saw people that looked like me, not just fighting for keeping greenhouse gas emissions low or fighting against carbon emissions. It became this struggle led by Indigenous people who, for them, their relationship to these lands, our relationship to these lands was not just an extractive relationship or a relationship of resources or but it was really their livelihoods, their lifeways, their existence, their cultural survival was tied to these lands that were being decimated by weather extremes, that were being destroyed by pipelines leaking and bursting into their watersheds. The whole intersection of racial justice, of social justice, of Indigenous sovereignty, and climate justice kind of really came to like this clear view for me around the age of like 13. And that's when I started to go to these protests called I Don't Know More. And that was for this movement to stop this pipeline called the Keystone XL pipeline, which is one of the biggest fossil fuel infrastructure projects. And I think it really goes to show it's like the people who are telling these stories, the people whose voices are at the forefront of shaping the conversation is really important, and ensuring that those voices are not just scientists and politicians and lobbyists and tech billionaires, but the people whose voices need to be heard are those on the front lines of this crisis, those who are every single day experiencing the reality of the climate crisis, whose very lifeways are at risk. And as I had the opportunity to use my voice to do a lot of community organizing to try to fight the fossil fuel industry in Colorado, and educate students across the Front Range, across my community, about the impacts of natural gas extraction, not just on the climate, but on our health. Predominantly poor and Black and brown communities where I was from were being targeted by this industry, where they were building these fracking pads like right by people's houses, schools, daycares, nursing homes, right in the vicinity of where people were breathing these toxic chemicals. So the way that this issues intersected with lots of other things that we care about, from public health to environmental racism and racial discrimination to the housing crisis, like all of these different, seemingly different problems that I started to become aware of in the world, like they were so deeply interconnected. They were so interwoven. And as I started to follow and have the opportunity to travel, meet young people in communities everywhere, that's where it really flipped for me. Not just the need to act, not just the weight of the climate crisis, but the opportunity and the possibility and the energy that I saw amongst my peers. And I've been at the UN, and I've given TED Talks, and I've been in all these kind of government policy spaces. I've been on Capitol Hill in the United States, lobbying congressmen and senators, trying to get their support for different lawsuits we filed and different campaigns we've launched. But for me, the possibility and the hope that I found and where we can go from here was really in meeting young people from all over the world, from schools just like yours, who were at the forefront of not just understanding the crisis, and we all felt that overwhelming weight, right? Like that's something that I think a lot of us from our generation experience. But what I saw was this like beautiful, like radical optimism and hope that understood that the part that we have to play as members of this younger generation on the planet is so profoundly important, that the power that we have is not just to kind of continue these cycles and stories around the climate crisis that haven't worked. Because in the last like 16 years of me doing this work, we just had another conference of parties, a giant climate summit in Egypt. And the ways in which we are approaching this issue have failed us and have continued to fail the most marginalized and the most impacted people. But where I found hope is in looking at the other young organizers from colleges, from communities, from universities, students who are brave enough to imagine an alternative to what exists and lean into the work. And part of it is deconstructing this idea of activism. And I've been like plagued with that my entire life, right? Being put into the spotlight as this like child activist. And for me, I find so much power in us reclaiming our voices, not just as spokespeople or as organizers or as community leaders, but as artists, as storytellers, as poets, as journalists, as people who work on the back end in tech and the variety of ways that our generation shows up and interacts with the world. That is the power that we hold in transforming the future. And I think fundamentally, one thing I want to leave y'all with is my understanding of all, like I'm 22 now. I was 6 years old when I got involved with that. And I'm really bad at math, but y'all can get a sense that I've been doing this for a long time. And in the last few years, my understanding of this work has continued to evolve, has continued to change. And a big part of that is the deepening of my education and my politicization and understanding the politics of and the history of what has created the conditions for the climate crisis. And for me, working with a lot of indigenous organizers, we see that not only is colonization the root of the extractive systems that have created the climate crisis, but decolonization and movements of indigenous people reclaiming their sovereignty and reclaiming their lands and reclaiming their autonomy and protecting their homelands from extraction and from the climate crisis. Those are literally solutions that are pulling us into the future. There was this beautiful study that was done a couple of years ago by the Indigenous Environmental Network. And I don't read studies, and I don't I'm not a scientist like that or do well with that kind of information, but this one really stuck out to me because they did basically a calculation of all the indigenous resistance movements across the US and Canada. And they were responsible for delaying or stopping like 20% of carbon emissions from the US and Canada. So when we talk about the solutions that are ahead, it's not just in big green organizations and nonprofits. It doesn't just lie in government. It doesn't just lie in the hands of the United Nations. If we've learned anything about the last few years, it's like a lot of these institutions that are supposed to be protecting and preserving our futures will fail us again and again. But the power to actually transform, to literally keep carbon in the ground, to keep fossil fuels in the ground, to keep carbon out of the atmosphere, the tangible impacts of the climate crisis, right? Those solutions are in the hands of the people. The power to organize and mobilize, like we saw during the uprisings that happened in 2020, for this moment of reckoning around white supremacy in our culture and renouncement of that, and imagining beyond our current relationship with police. That those moments have been shaped by people, by young people, being brave enough to imagine an alternative to what we see around us. Because what we see around us is chaos, no matter how you're looking at it or where you're consuming it. But the power that we hold is so much beyond that. And
I just want to give you your 1 minute warning, but like you're getting an emotional response from me right now. And I hope that the audience is, taking away from this the same things that I am. So guys, please post your questions in the chat.
Appreciate y'all. Yeah, no, I mean that's it. So to conclude, and doing this for so long, I find an immense amount of hope in having conversations like this with y'all, and understanding y'all's ideas and questions and visions. And it's a lot, but I think if we move from a place of love and understand that this comes from a vision of building something more beautiful than what we see around us, we hold an immense amount of power. And looking back through history, every great movement that has ever taken hold has been as a result of people being brave enough to challenge the status quo. And that's what we have to do again. We have to challenge the status quo of how we are responding to this crisis and how we talk about this crisis and the stories that we tell and the voices that need to be heard are yours. So thank you for your time.
X, thank you. I guess I'll just give a little bit of my story here, just because you've gotten such an emotional response out of me. I'm Bermudian Canadian. My mom identified as First Nations Pequot band from Canada, and my dad is a Black Bermudian. He's what we call a child of the Enterprise. So essentially, the Enterprise was actually a slave ship that brought those African slaves to Bermuda. It was called the Enterprise. Interestingly enough, some of you guys in the audience may be children of the Enterprise too, right? Because that's your lineage. I encourage you to find that out. But essentially, you were talking about how you grew up in your living spaces and, the ideals that you kind of grow up with, and those can change once you kind of broaden your horizons. But so I grew up in Bacaton, Bermuda. That's what we call it, Bacaton. Not necessarily, the best of places to grow up. But what I want to do is start a conversation. Guys in the audience, can you share what spoke to you the most from hearing X's story? What kind of emotional response did you get from this? How do you feel climate change is really affecting your culture and you? You can post that in the chat, but I guess I'll ask you a question really quickly. So how do you feel that climate change has the future of your Indigenous culture, X?
So my family in Mexico, I grew up visiting Xochimilco, this little town called Santa Cruz, Acalpixca. And we only get running water like once a week. And so you have to make it last for the whole week. So you fill up these massive barrels full of water. And that's everything for showering, washing your clothes, flushing the toilet, we divide it out where it needs to go. But that real like appreciation for something that is so abundant in where I grew up in the States, going back and being like, oh no, like this is not a given, you know. And that is a result of you know, of kind of racist city zoning and kind of deeply entrenched poverty and anti-indigenous decision making for many generations. But it's also as a result of the climate crisis, where, you know, our city's access to water has continued to dwindle, and Mexico City is one of the most kind of dysfunctionally designed cities, and there, like in many parts of the world, you know, there's a crisis around access to water, and that's going to continue to affect poor families and communities. And my family, you know, my dad grew up in poverty in Mexico, and despite that, there are families that were much worse off in communities a little bit further into rural areas, where you would get water once a week, but you'd have to go like ride a donkey to a spring like miles and miles and miles away and bring it back for your whole family. And it's like we had running water, even though it was only once a week. So I think those are the personal impacts that I see it shaping and disrupting and eventually maybe displacing us from a place where my lineage for, you know, generations has existed in this community on this land. And you're always going to see those impacts hit the poorest and the most marginalized people first. So definitely those concerns around water hit really hard. And one thing I heard about Bermuda too is like there's not really a lot of fresh water on the island, and that's part of why there wasn't, you know, a significant indigenous population upon colonization or historically. I'm sure that's a complex history, but you know, water is crucial.
Understood. Thank you. And I mean, history is told by the conqueror, right? But we'll move on from that. So I do have a question for you from the chat. With being a musician, do you find yourself contributing your passion about climate change and other activist terms through your music? If so, what is your creative process on that? And which projects are you most proud of? That's 3 questions, so we can break it down if you need to.
Yeah, I'd say I've been in love with making music for just as long as I've been doing a lot of this activism stuff. And as I've evolved and kind of grown out of the space of being kind of really vocal as a climate spokesperson, or as a I've leaned more into my art, kind of in my music as a space to process and heal, and like a very cathartic, very kind of healing space for me to not just express and tell stories and educate, but also just, you know, figure out what's happening internally and how it's a reflection of the world outside me. And so the music for sure, like it's a reflection of my like lived experience into my world, and I feel like it's a way that I can tell a lot of these similar stories and communicate these messages like I'm talking to you all about, in a way that's far more personal. And I don't know, the energy that I experience when I play these shows, right? Like right before the pandemic, we had this album release show for this amazing project, this collaborative record I did. And the energy in that building was like nothing I've ever felt, you know. And I've been at the forefront of marches and with thousands of people out on the streets, and you get a similar sensation because everybody's there, not just for the entertainment, but the music. For me, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. See people vibing. And it's just different. To lean into doing the things that you love, to tell the stories that are important to you. And I think I encourage everybody, you know, that's a big lesson that I learned when doing a lot of this kind of climate organizing, is everybody has a very rigid perspective of what activism looks like or what creating change looks like. And we're most powerful when we step outside of that and we do just what's real for us. And for me, that's the music. And so the process has always been, you know, the creative process is like when I'm the most alive, you know, when I'm the most passionate and inspired. And I think working with people and other artists and other storytellers and collaborating is where, I don't know, I thrive the most.
That was a perfect answer to a perfect question. Helen Painter from the Whitney Institute posted a good question in the chat. And she stated, you've spoken a lot about the big things, exposures you've had in large public forums, but what are some of the things that you're doing personally to help the climate change cause?
People think I was so like this narrative of personal responsibility was so like a significant part of the climate narrative when I was growing up. And my organization put together like the list of 50 simple things you can do in your life every day to stop the climate crisis. And I think as you learn the history of advocacy and environmental organizing, like a lot of that propaganda essentially that forced the public to believe that the environmental crisis is the fault of the public, of individual choices, was fabricated by like fossil fuel companies, petroleum companies, to shift the weight off of the systemic responsibility that they hold in creating the climate crisis and creating the plastic crisis, and say, no, like if you just recycle, then like that's it's on you. It's shifting the blame and shifting the onus onto consumers, onto individuals, onto students. And so I've gone through my journey of thinking systemically and critically about this idea of individual action. And I think where I've arrived in a lot of ways is like the things we do every day are they're a doorway to a greater understanding of the power that we have as individuals. But that, to me, that power only like comes to life when we're in community, when we build with people around us, when we look at our peers, at our classmates, at our friends, and we realize that each of us hold this immense amount of individual power because we're so interconnected with the world, because the fossil fuels that we emit when we drive to school do impact the sea level rise in a different part of the globe, or do impact so I think having an understanding of our individual footprint can tie us to the rest of the world in a really important way. But that being said, I think the action that I'm really interested in seeing is more systemic and is more collective. And I think for me, it's like those small interactions, those small conversations, and I'm in a lot of different spaces with different people, and those, the discussions that we can have kind of intimately just with people that are around us, are a big part of not just, continuing to push these things we believe in, but educating and inspiring and galvanizing power kind of in our immediate community, in our immediate vicinity. And I think that's such an important part of, and for me. And so I've been like never eat meat, plant-based my whole life. And we live in LA, so we drive cars all the time. So we could all do better. I could definitely do better. But I definitely, my mom was always
Definitely.
like, turn off the lights, turn off the water, those little things that are important. But yeah, I think it's how we take it into the world and how we take it into our community that is, for me, and I think for the climate, the most impactful.
So can I ask you really quick, just to pay homage to your culture and your ancestors, can you pronounce your name loud and proud for us?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, actually. How I pronounce it differently depending on who I'm talking to, and but yeah, it's pronounced Shiu Deskat. Shiu Deskat. Shiu Deskat. Y'all can feel free to unmute and try to say that too. Shiu Deskat.
Deskat.
There you go.
All right.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this deep, down to earth conversation that needs to be had. We appreciate your time. We really do.
Thank you.
All right, guys. This is your final question. There's a link in the chat. Click that link and you can enter your response into our last Mentimeter question. Share your thoughts in a sentence or two. Yes, your responses are still anonymous. The question is, what are you looking forward to at the 2022 Youth Climate Summit? The question is, apologies, we have changed the question. It's at 1325. But why don't we first have inviting Andrew to set up. All right, seeing as we have another technical difficulty today, I am going to introduce Andrew Fagerheim. Actually, let's just bring him on. Andrew, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, Noelle.
Hey, Andrew, we can hear you.
Awesome. I am so excited to be with you all tomorrow. I'm here at Bowie and so excited to see you all in person. Really looking forward to getting to know you all and chatting more this weekend.
It's great to see you, and I'm very excited to meet you in person.
Looking forward to it, Noel.
Great. Enjoy our island. We'll see you soon. All right, so we have the correct question. What is a moment or insight that stands out to you from the past 4 days? So the past 4 days, we've met some really interesting people doing exciting work on behalf of the environment. And by being part of the Youth Climate Summit 2022, you're also taking action on behalf of the environment. Tomorrow is your chance to see our local partners and organizations that are joining you in the important work that is happening in Bermuda. They'll describe opportunities for you to get involved in a variety of projects that are coming this year. And let's thank our partners. Thank you to our founding partners, and thank you to BUEI. This is the end of our virtual sessions. I hope you've all been inspired by the science and stories that were shared here today. I'd like to thank the youth climate activists, Shutezkat, also known as X, and Sarah Saeed, as well as our subject matter expert, Andrew McFarlane, for today's presentations. Let's also thank the speakers from the past 3 days, and a huge thank you again to BUEI for facilitating this event. And finally, of course, thank you to our partners, especially HSBC and AXA for making this amazing event possible. This is Noelle signing off. I can't wait to see you all tomorrow in person for day 5 of the 2022 Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute's Youth Climate Summit.